In the mid-1950s, the French started looking around for a smaller armoured car. Now, they had the EBR in service at this point, but it's a big 8-wheeler with a 75mm gun, later upgraded to a 90. And they borrowed for a short while some ferrets off of the British for operations, and they decided they liked them very much. I don't blame them, they're a lot of fun. But they decided, well, we're French, we must have our own that we make locally. So they set about trying to design a smaller armoured car for suitable purposes, and they gave the contract to Panhard, and they came out with the Model 245. Now, eventually this would become known as the AML, Auto Mitrailleuse Légère, and this turned out to be an incredibly successful vehicle. Now, it's one of those gripes I have, let's say, with modelling companies, is that it's possible to find a model of let's say, a Tiger 1 on the 17th of July 1943 before it bent the headlight guard, and then it's also possible to find a model of the same Tiger 1 in July of 1943, the day after it bent the headlight guard. You can't find 1/35th scale AMLs for some reason. I had to go to a French company and buy a resin model, which shows you just how underappreciated this vehicle is. Now, over time, these things were exported to something like 55, 70, a ridiculous amount of countries. I'm sure the list of every single one is on Wikipedia. One of those countries to which AMLs were exported is Ireland. I am in the cavalry workshops at the Curragh camp, a little bit west of Dublin. And they have a couple of AMLs laid out for me to have a look at, which is awfully generous of them because I only asked them for the 160, but whatever, we got a choice here. And they had several variants of AML. Over time, we'll come back, we'll cover the various other variants. Today, we're looking mainly at the 60s. And there were two types of 60s. So these showed up in about 1961 because the Irish Army at the time was kind of lacking in modern armour. And they wanted to go shopping. The AML90 with the big 90mm gun looked very impressive and very economical. So they went shopping and they realized that the budget would not go for 90mm. And they come back with 16 of these. It is the AML60-7CS. Now, originally, as these things came, you had your 60mm mortar on the right and you had two French 7.62s on the left. Now, the Irish eventually got rid of the twin 7.62s, apparently because the local terrorist organization, the Provisional IRA, had 12.7mm machine guns, and the Irish realized that they were outgunned by the terrorists. So they removed the twin 7.62s and they replaced it with a 12.7. Yes, caliber 50, as we all know and love. Vehicle itself, very small, and well, as ever, we are going to start at the front and work our way around and then go into the inside. And then when we've done with this 60 CS on the outside, we're going to have a look inside at a 60 HB, which was the new and improved variant. All right, so starting off, so we have a welded pointy hull. If you look at the Panhard EBR, you'll see that the hull design is very similar, except you can't see it so easily because of the sand shields they have. The armor is between 8 to 12mm. And one thing that the EBR had that the Panhard does not is a little machine gun at the front. So they saw sense. This thing is cramped enough on the inside. I don't know what they would have been thinking had they tried. They obviously realized it was a stupid idea. They kept it with the EBRs and they got rid of it on the AMLs. License plate. So Irish AMLs would have had a decal on the side here. There's actually one on the other one. We'll show you conveniently enough what unit they're from. And then when you go around here, the headlights are much lower and much easier to get muddy and dirty. I don't see much else. Now, when you get down underneath, you're going to see that the wheels are on ball swivels. So they are coil spring suspension, but the wheels will swivel sideways on the ball mounts. It is, happily enough, an all-wheel drive vehicle. Lights. So we have your blackout lights, service lights, headlights down the bottom, and foldable wing mirrors. Bit of stowage. We have a canvas shield here, canvas bag here, forgive me, for something. I suspect it'll be a windshield, and I am now going to ask off camera to the subject matter expert. Is this a windshield? Yeah. You do this often enough, you start to figure things out on your own. All right, so the housings here, they are the top of the coil springs, but they also serve as one of the anchor points for lifting on the crane. So those little loops that I mentioned a little earlier, you can mount them in here. There's a couple of slots at the back, and you can lift it up and hoist it onto a ship when you are off on your UN missions, as you would be. We're going to come back to the spotlights in a moment. A little vane sight here for the TC, let him know he's on. On the front slope, you got a couple of stowage points here for some of your Pioneer kits. You see there's a fire extinguisher, it looks like, on the far side. And, well, then you get to the side. Now let's move the camera. Coming around the side, you'll see that kind of similar to the AEC armored car we did before, the armor comes outwards to make a larger possible turret ring, and then it angles inward again because you just don't need to use the space. Left side door, you would also mount a spare wheel on here, but apparently it is very heavy, so you don't want to use it all that often unless you're in an emergency. Another of these mounting points for the sling loads or tie downs, and they were nice enough to put a step with a solid grip on it as well, I have to say, to come up. The hull, of course, as you can see, it's welded. Some of the metal fixtures, like the fenders here, those are just bolted on. And then you get to some of the stowage bins, which look very deep and doubtless, oh, they are deep. I can only imagine that anything you're looking for is going to be at the bottom of everything else. So you'll have to pull out the whole shebang in order to get into what you needed. So here's your radio mount. Smaller stowage, much more convenient. All right, coming back to the engine deck, we got the air intakes are up here. Again, more stowage, air vent on the side of the back of the turret, it looks like. And then you get to the engine compartment. Now, there's a couple of neat features I have to say with this engine compartment. Here, let me move this camera a bit over. One of the joys of working in confined spaces is I have to take undignified positions. So I'm now half bent over and I'm not sure my back is not going to like me. Anyway, engine compartment on the original Panhard is actually very nicely thought out. So these two handles have a pin that you can hold in place to stop them from swiveling. When you do want to open it up, you simply rotate outwards. Actually, rotate it halfway. You can use the handle if you want. Pull them out, and the handles will then double as a latch in place. So pull it down, go underneath, and you should be able to lift up. Should. Well, that one's not working. This one was. There we go. Holds it in place while you're working away. Inside, well, the engine is a 4HD. It's a derivative of a civilian car engine. It cranks out 90 horsepower. Woohoo. It's a flat 4, and yeah, it was always sort of the Achilles heel of the vehicle. So this is, I mean, still a fairly hefty vehicle. I'll look up the figure in a second, and it's being hauled by a 4-banger. When you're looking inside, well, again, it's an old 4-banger, so it's relatively simple. So the fuel system. You have a main tank, a header tank, fuel pump over here, and air filter canister. You see the 4 spark plugs are angled forward, so as I was getting a little earlier a lesson in spark plug repair and checking. Apparently sometimes the cylinders would go off. You want to check which one is not cylindering correctly, which isn't firing. You just reach down and you touch the 4 spark plugs and see which one doesn't burn you. If you're lucky, the first one. Anyway, later on, these things got replaced by diesels, but not on this one. Okay, so if you wanted to pump up your tires, they thought of that and has its own compression system. So on the left-hand side is your air compressor. On the right-hand side, in this box here for stowage, is the air line. So what you do is you would hook up the air compressor to a shaft that comes out of the engine, locks it in place, you run the air line to your wheel, you turn on the engine, and you now have a compressor to compress the air to inflate your tires. And the tire pressures are helpfully located on the back here. We're looking at it there for a second, trying to figure out what the things are measured in, and we're going to work on the basis of a Pascal system before you went to the more current kilograms per meter sort of pressure system that we have today. And of course you have your various speeds depending on your pressure type and road type. Moving up, well, the license plate they've mounted here, but I suspect it was originally mounted where these holes are because you have a little light to illuminate your license plate. Convoy distance light, red tail light. Exhausts come out under this shield here, so it's a split exhaust, goes each side, and you see the actual exhaust port on the edge here. And then you get up to the turret. So on the turret you got strap down points, your ventilator I mentioned earlier, and the builder's plate on the right hand side. So this vehicle is a CS, as I mentioned. It was the first of the variants. Now we're actually going to go inside in more detail in the HB. But I just wanted to quickly explain what we're looking at, because you're going to see a difference in the stowage and the seating and so on, possibly because this one came first, maybe there were lessons learned. The basket itself is actually very similar. It's a tubular sort of structure. There is a lot more room in the middle of this particular one, probably because the caliber 50 ammunition stowage was bigger and you needed to leave more room for the big ammo bins. But there's also a missing rack here, in all fairness. 3-man crew, you'll see it again in the HB. Manual traverse, and the driver's position now, I'm just going to pan around here and you'll have a look. The driver's position is very similar in the two vehicles, although very obviously older in this particular one. So you'll see the switches look a little bit older and so on, but the general design is going to be the same. And speak of the devil, 60 HB. Now the Irish bought 20 of these in accompaniment with about 16 AML90s. And well, they were happy enough with the AMLs. They also incidentally bought M3 VTTs, Vehicle to Transport the Troop, which are the APC variant built on the same hull, chassis, a lot of commonality of parts. Now, obvious differences. Well, we have the Hotchkiss Brandt mortar with the big obvious spring on it, and this could either be muzzle loaded by hanging rounds in the traditional manner, or you could breech load the things. And to the left, the twin 7.62 machine guns. Remember, this is sort of configuration that originally the CS would have come with before they retrofitted it with the 12.7 and removed the coaxials. 2 spotlights, one for the commander to play around with up here, and then there's the coaxial one, which literally is a coax in the traditional sense of the word. That is, you elevate or depress the armament, you will elevate or depress the spotlight. It is white light, there is no infrared option on this. Otherwise, the vehicle is externally very similar, so we're not going to go around this. Instead, all we're going to do is go inside and see if I fit. Now, there is going to be a catch here. Many, many moons ago, when I had colour in my hair and I was young and handsome and I wore an Irish uniform, they tried to put me into this thing and it did not go well. They put me in a driver's seat, and after a couple of minutes trying to figure out how to fit in it, the sergeant looks at me and says, you know, trooper, this ain't going to be for you, get out and go to the gunner's course. So I don't have great expectations they're going to do much better. Even after a whole decade's worth of experience of getting into old, cramped, small vehicles, this one is probably going to defeat me. At least I could get into the Timony.